The 18th of July, in the year 452, after the birth of Christ, the northern Italian city of Aquileia, a woman named Aurelia Marcella crouches in the darkness of a wine cellar beneath what was once the grandest villa in the merchants' quarter. She is 34 years old, the wife of Tribune Gaius Petronius Marcellus, who commands what remains of the garrison defending the city walls above her head. She has not seen her husband in 11 days. The last time she saw him, he kissed her forehead and told her to hide the children. He told her that if the walls fell, she should take them to the lagoons to the east. He told her that whatever happened, she must not let the Huns take her alive. Above her head, the sound of screaming has not stopped for 3 hours. Aurelia holds her 2 daughters against her chest. Flavia is 12, Tertia is 9. They stopped crying 2 days ago when the food ran out. Now they simply shake. The cellar smells of old wine and mold and something else, something that has been drifting through the streets for days. The smell of burning flesh and rotting bodies that even the thick stone walls cannot keep out. What Aurelia does not know yet is that her husband died on the walls 6 hours ago, an arrow through his throat, while he directed the defense of the eastern gate. What she does not know is that the Huns breached the walls at dawn through a section that collapsed after 3 months of relentless bombardment. What she does not know is that the warriors now moving through the streets above her head are not simply looting, they are hunting. And what Aurelia Marcella absolutely does not know is what the Huns do to the wives of Roman military commanders. She does not know that there is a specific protocol, a system that has been refined over decades of conquest across the steppes and into the heart of Europe. She does not know that wives of officers are identified and separated from the general population. She does not know that what happens to them next is designed not merely to punish, but to send a message that will echo across the empire for generations. She is about to find out. The footsteps above grow closer. Aurelia hears voices speaking a language she does not understand, harsh guttural sounds that seem barely human. She hears the crash of doors being broken down. She hears the screams of neighbors she has known for years. She smells smoke from buildings that are beginning to burn. And then she hears footsteps on the stairs leading down to the cellar. Tonight you will discover the systematic practices that the Huns employed against the families of Roman military leadership. Practices that ancient historians recorded in fragments too disturbing for most modern textbooks to include. You will learn why the wives of Roman generals and tribunes were specifically targeted and what purpose their suffering served in the broader strategy of Hunnic conquest. You will understand why the Byzantine historian Priscus, who actually visited the court of the Hun king and saw these practices firsthand, wrote that the treatment of captive Roman noble women was designed to break not just bodies but entire bloodlines. And you will learn what archaeological evidence discovered in mass graves across the Balkans reveals about the scale of what happened to thousands of Roman women, whose only crime was being married to men who defended the empire. If you find this content valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel. We explore the darkest corners of history that mainstream sources refuse to discuss. But before I tell you exactly what happened in that cellar beneath Aquileia, before I reveal what the Huns did Aurelia Marcella and her daughters when they finally broke through the door, I need to take you back. I need to explain how the most feared warriors in the ancient world developed their particular methods for dealing with the wives of their enemies. Because understanding what happened in Aquileia requires understanding the system that created it. And I promise you that by the time we return to that cellar, you will understand exactly why Aurelia's husband told her that death was preferable to capture. Let me tell you about another woman first. Her name was Licinia Eudoxia. She was not a victim of the Huns, but her story illustrates what Roman women faced during this era of collapse. She was the daughter of the Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius II, and she was married to the Western Emperor Valentinian III. When Valentinian was assassinated in 455, she was taken as a prize by Vandal raiders who sacked Rome itself. She spent years in captivity before being released. Her story was famous. It was discussed in the courts of Constantinople, but the thousands of women taken by the Huns. Their stories were not famous. Their stories were not discussed. They simply disappeared into the vastness of the steppes and were never heard from again. The Huns emerged from the Central Asian steppes sometime in the 4th century after the birth of Christ. Their origins remain disputed among historians, but what is not disputed is the terror they inspired from the moment they crossed into Europe. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, writing in the 37 Odes, described them as a race of men who surpassed all other barbarians in their savagery. He wrote that they were short and squat, with massive shoulders and thick necks, that their faces were so hideous and beardless that they might be mistaken for two-legged beasts rather than human beings. But Ammianus was describing more than physical appearance. He was describing a culture of warfare that the Romans had never encountered. The Huns were nomadic horse warriors who lived in the saddle from childhood. They could shoot their composite bows with deadly accuracy while riding at full gallop. They ate raw meat that they tenderized by placing it between their thighs and their horses' flanks. They had no permanent settlements and no written language. And most importantly for our story, they had developed sophisticated methods for extracting maximum value from conquered peoples. This is where the wives of military commanders become relevant. But first, you need to understand something about Hunnic society that most histories do not emphasize. The Huns were not simply raiders, they were empire builders. By the time of Ayla, they controlled territory stretching from the Rye River in the west to the Ural Mountains in the east. They ruled over dozens of subject peoples, including Goths, Gepiides, Alans, and remnants of earlier nomadic confederations. They extracted tribute from both the Eastern and Western Roman empires. At the height of their power, they received 2,100 of gold annually from Constantinople alone. An empire of this scale required more than military force. It required systems. Systems for extracting wealth, systems for controlling subject populations, systems for breaking the will of conquered people so completely that rebellion became unthinkable. The treatment of captured women was part of this system among nomadic warrior cultures like the Huns. Women of the enemy leadership class served multiple purposes. They were trophies that demonstrated victory. They were hostages whose treatment could be used to demoralize remaining resistance. They were breeding stock whose children would carry the bloodline of the conquerors, and they were objects of trade whose value depended on their social status and physical condition. The Byzantine historian Priscus provides the most detailed first-hand account of Hunnic society. In the year 449, he traveled to the court of the Hun king as part of a diplomatic mission from Constantinople. What he saw there changed his understanding of the barbarian world forever. Priscus describes meeting a Greek merchant who had been captured during the sack of the city of Viminatium on the Danube. This merchant had been wealthy before his capture. He had been assigned to a Hun noble named Anagesius as part of the division of spoils. Priscus notes that among the Huns it was customary for wealthy captives to be given to the nobility, while common prisoners were distributed among the warriors or sold as slaves. But Priscus also describes something more disturbing. He writes about the way Hun elites treated their slaves and captives. He notes that unlike Roman masters, who were legally prohibited from killing their slaves without cause, the Huns had no such restrictions. Hun nobles could and did execute captives for minor offenses or simply for entertainment. They could and did use female captives in whatever manner they chose. Priscus records a conversation he had with the Greek merchant about the differences between Roman and Hunnic slavery. The merchant who had adapted to life among the Huns initially argued that captives were treated better than poor citizens of the Roman Empire. He claimed that Hun masters were more generous than Roman tax collectors. He claimed that life on the steppes had a freedom that life in the declining empire could not match. But when Priscus pressed him, the merchant